Good morning, everybody. Parashat Vayesse. We need a triple header to even touch the surface of this parasha, so I guess the best thing to do would be to start at the very beginning. I'd like to dedicate our learning today to the Refuah Shelema of Mordechai ben Yafa and Chaya Sarah Bat Simcha. May Hashem give them restored strength, and may they heal and be better than they even started out. And I think that's what our parasha is going to talk about. It's about the power of the human body to heal and to reinvent itself. So we're going to start in the beginning of Parashat Vayetse. We're probably going to have to take a few steps back and then a few steps forward. But let's start in Pasuk 10, Perek 28, the beginning of our parasha. Vayetse Yaakov mi be'er shava vayelech Harana. So many things to talk about. Yaakov is leaving Be'er Shava. He's going towards Haran. The first question we might ask ourselves is, human beings are sedentary by nature. We don't move around so much unless there's a reason. We like to settle. We like to be settled. And if Yaakov is leaving Be'er Shava and going to Harana, which opens up a whole nother slew of questions. The first one being, why is he going to the very place, to Haran, to the very place that Abraham made his servants swear not to take Yitzchak there under any circumstances? And now it's part of his destination. He's headed there. And if we were live, you would tell me, well, that's what his parents told him to do. They sent him there on purpose. But if I asked you what's the number one reason on his visa application why he wants to leave Be'er Shava, so two things are happening. There's a Vayetse and a Vayelech, and that usually happens when we are on the move. We're leaving from somewhere, hopefully, and we're going to somewhere. Those two things, sometimes we're just leaving, but we don't know where we're going to. And sometimes we're just running away. We have a place that we want to go to, but we're not 100% sure what we're running from. And so until we address those things, Menjeye, where you're coming from, Fenrayich, where you're going to, we say those at our Seder, at our Sephardic Seder. That's part of the movement factor that needs to be addressed. But on the simplest terms, just to bring us all into this week's parasha, we see Vayetse Yaakov mi be'er Shava, and all of a sudden we have flashbacks. We remember all too well why Yaakov is leaving. And we might think the reason that he's leaving is because his brother had said, as soon as daddy dies, I'm going to kill Yaakov. And the reason his brother said that was because of the infamous blessing that Yaakov took as he posed as Esav. So we might go into Parashat Vayetse and see Yaakov as a fugitive. He's on the run. But we have to address some questions, because if we think that Yaakov is running away from Esav, it's not going to inform our story, as well as if we are a little bit more methodical in our assessments. So let's for a minute revisit that story. If we never left third grade and we kept with the notion that Esav is this bloody, red, aggressive, dangerous person, and he was an Ish Sadeh, Yodea Sayed, he's a hunter, you have this, you could put him in a checked flannel shirt and have a rifle hanging over his shoulder. You may have an image of him, I don't know, maybe wearing a Davy Crockett hat. I don't know how you are picturing this hairy Esav, but something tells me that we would not want to meet him in a dark alley. And that's our original impression of Esav. And if that's going to inform our story, then we're not doing justice to ourselves. So the first thing I'd like to say is, yes, after the whole beracha debacle, Esav did say something. I'd like to address or revisit that, because in chapter 27, last week, towards the end of the parasha, it says in verse 41, Vayistom Esav et Yaakov. And Esav was fuming or holding on to a hate that he had for Yaakov. Al ha-beracha. So we're on to something because of the beracha. Asher bercho aviv, that his father had blessed him. So either he's angry at the beracha that he got, or he's angry at the beracha that Yaakov got. But in any regard, Vayomer Esav belibo. Now we're going to go to court, and we're going to try to incriminate Esav as having a motive, as having a premeditative murder plan. Except when we go to court, the lawyer is going to say, Vayomer Esav belibo. Esav really never verbalized his intent. The intent was something that was deep inside of him. And this is what he said inside. Can you be liable for your thoughts? He said in his heart, the days of my father's mourning are going to come close. And then I will kill my brother Yaakov. Let's talk about a couple of things. A person who is aggressive and hot-blooded and feels like they were wrong and is vengeful, and their blood is boiling, do you think that they're going to have the time and the presence of mind to say, I'm going to put my anger on ice, I'm going to press the pause button, put it on hold, and I'm going to wait. It could be 10 years, it could be 80 years. I'm going to wait until my father Yitzchak dies. And then at that point, I will kill my brother Yaakov. Now you could say that that Yitzchak may have thought his days were nearing to die, and that's why he gave the blessings, and maybe it wasn't going to be that long. But so far, Esav has some pretty good alibis. The first being that he never really made an audible statement. The second being that he isn't acting in hot blood. And the third, and I think the most beautiful of all, is, and the Torah doesn't have to record it this way. He could say, Aharga et Yaakov, sof pasuk, I'll kill Yaakov, period. But he says, Achi, my brother. And there's something very tender in that. There's something very beautiful in that, even in his moment of rage, if that's what you want to call this, he still sees Yaakov as his brother. The next verse, don't ask me how Rivka finds out what Esav had said, because he said it in his heart, and you could say that it was a prophetic awareness. But regardless, how is Esav described in regards to Rivka? Bina Hagadol. He's not just her son. He's not just the brother of Yaakov. He's not just the son of Yitzchak. It's her son, and it's her Gadol, her big son. And she goes and she calls to Yaakov, Bina HaKatan. So if you wanted to say, like the Ma'or HaGadol, if you want to say the important one is the Gadol one, he's still holding a level of importance in the household in Rivka's mind. And she calls Yaakov her young son, and she says, Esav is planning to kill you. So now, my son, Shema Bekoli, you listen to me. And we had said that this is where Rivka reclaims the voice of Chava, who had told Adam, eat from the tree. And God tells Adam, because you listen to the voice of your wife, look at the devastation that has become of the world. Look at the dynamic that now we find ourselves in. And so Sarah reclaims that voice when she tells Abraham to send away Ishmael. And God says, listen to her voice. And now here too, Rivka says these words, Shema Bekoli. She had used these very same words when she wanted Yaakov to go in and get a blessing. She tells him, Kum, get up, Birach, run to Lavan, my brother, to Haran, and stay with him, Yamim Achadim. Yamim in Torah is very often Shanim, years. So stay there a couple of years, Ad Asher Tashuv Chamat Achicha, because your brother's anger will subside, it will recede, he will calm down. So really, Rivka's plan is just to take him out of an immediate danger, it seems like, because she does believe that she'll be able to call for Yaakov, and she does believe that they'll be reconciled. And by the way, just so we don't forget this, maybe it's a spoiler for next week, but when they do actually meet, Esav doesn't touch a hair on Yaakov's head. So Rivka is not so far away from reality. And neither is our assessment that maybe the reason that Yaakov is leaving is not just to run away from his brother who might want to kill him. And I have a few more things to support that. So she tells him, now she says it a second time in verse 45, Ad shuv af achicha, again. First she says, Chamat achicha your brother's anger is going to subside, and his fury against you is going to subside. So much so, v'shachach et asher asita lo, he's going to even forget completely what you did to him. And by the way, another spoiler is when they do meet up, Esav never says, hey, brother, we never really cleared this issue up with the beracha. We never really got to the bottom of it. We never, you owe me an apology. None of that ever takes place. Whether or not Esav forgot is left to be argued. But regardless, she says, Veshalachti ulkachticha misham, I'll send for you. I'll bring you back from there. Why should I mourn the two of you on one day? And Rivka tells Yitzchak, now that seems to be the end of the conversation right now, but we're not sure if we were the director and we wanted to place the actors on stage, we're not sure who's present for each of the conversations. And I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. Rivka tells Yitzchak, Katzti bechayai. Now, is Yaakov present for this? Is Esav within earshot of this? We're going to see all the possibilities because this is important for Al Pirasha. She says, Katzti, the Kof is small. My life is small or shortened. It's going to be the death of me. It's going to be the end of me, of my life, from these benot chet, from these women, these Hittite women, the Canaanite women. Im lokeach Yaakov is to take one of these women from Bnei Chet Ka'ele, like these, like Benot Haaretz, Lama li Chaim. What's the use? What's the purpose of living? And now Yitzchak calls Yaakov. So maybe he was there and he just calls him forth, or maybe he calls for him and he blesses him and he instructs him and he says, make sure not to take a wife from Benot Canaan. Here we're talking about 1 minute running away. So now you have two answers on the board. Why might Yaakov be leaving? One might be because his brother wants to kill him, and one might be so that he could go find a wife in Haran, just like Yitzchak got his wife from Haran. The one thing that we didn't talk about, but maybe we'll just put it on the table as well, is in the past, which son do we send away? In the past, We've sent away the bad son. We sent away Ishmael. We sent away the son that's going to have a negative influence. And who do we keep close to us? We keep close to us the son that is going to become the covenantal son, or the one that we want to impress to carry the mantle, the future leadership. And so the house of Rivka and Yitzchak becomes a safe house, but for Esav, instead of, and by the way, if you want to keep somebody safe, you wouldn't send them out with strangers. You would, if the purpose of sending Yaakov was for his physical safety, then I don't know that sending him, and especially to Lavan of all people, which Yaakov says himself, I froze at night, I was scorched in the daytime from the heat. I don't know that that's the best physical place for safety. I don't even know if there was a cultural safety, the Im Lavan Garti that Rashi loves to say, that it was so hard to keep my culture and keep my heritage while I was by Lavan. And maybe we'll be able to talk about that towards the end of the class. But the craziest part of this whole thing is, if Rivka says, your brother wants to kill you, go to my brother's house in Haran, which was a couple of verses ago, I would think that before she even finished the last words of those sentences, he's already out the door and at the train station. And it's clear that he doesn't pack a lunch with him, and he doesn't take a sandwich, and he doesn't take clothing with him, because this week he's going to ask God for lechem, le'echol, and beged lilbosh. He doesn't even have the basic things that one might take. When the servant of Abraham left to go find a wife, he took camels, he took money, he took all kinds of things with him. So we're not sure exactly, but for some odd reason, Yaakov hasn't left. And if you ask me when's the most dangerous time to be there, is now. The closer we are to the event of having taken the beracha, that's the level of anger that he must be experiencing, that Esav, and that's why it would be most dangerous. And he seems to be hanging around over here. You'll see in verse 2, his father says, Kum, go to Padan Aram, go to the house of Betuel, the father of your mother, and take from there a wife from the daughters of Lavan, the brother of your mother. And El Shaddai is going to bless you, and he's going to make you fruitful and multiply. And you're going to be a Kehal Amim. I'm going to want to talk about this term Kehal Amim. What is a Kehila? What is a grouping? What does this mean, a Kahal Amim? I'm hopefully going to get to it as we move forward, but hold that thought. And also his father gives him this blessing, and he says, you should get the beracha of Abraham. Hashem should give you the beracha of Abraham to you and your children to inherit the land that Elohim gave to Abraham. And Yitzchak sends Yaakov, who goes to Padan Aram, to Lavan, to the house of, to the son of Betuel, Arami. This is where we get that whole Arami Oved Avi, that the Aramean enslaved our father. We believe it could have been Lavan who enslaved Yaakov, and we'll talk about those words of slavery. They're strong words, and we talk about them on Pesach, and we say them in the Haggadah, because that may have been the first Jew in exile experience that we're having, where we're not just in exile, but we are subservient, and we are literally being an Eved, and you'll see the words in this week's Parasha. Anyway, now Esav sees, remember the guy that I told you has the gun, and it's clicked and it's pointing at Esav's head, at Yaakov's head, and we think anything could happen at any second? Well, look at Esav and you tell me how you feel about him. And by the way, one last thing. Vayar Esav ki berach Yitzchak et Yaakov. Esav sees that Yitzchak blessed Yaakov and sent him to Padan Aram. Hold on. Sarah, I'm in the class.
I know. Gail can't get on and she's hysterical. She said there's a code and I don't have the code.
There is no code. There is no code. Just put Vivien Hidary. She might be on the wrong Zoom.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, goodbye.
Sorry about that. Okay, yes.
Probably needs a call-in number because she's not on Zoom.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I know this specifically doesn't have a password. Let's continue verse 6. Esav sees that his father blessed Yaakov and sent him to Padan Aram to take from there a wife. As he blessed him, and he told him, make sure you don't take from Benot Canaan. So yeah, of course he gets the memo. Esav gets the memo that the Benot of Canaan are not desirable. That we get. But why aren't we reacting? Why aren't we jumping out of our seats from the drama that's building up? Imagine Esav knows that Yitzchak knows that Yaakov posed and pretended to be somebody he wasn't so that he could extract a beracha from his father. Yitzchak knows this about Yaakov. So does Esav. And now Yaakov is getting called to the principal's office. Young boy, I know what you've done. Come to me. This is what I think Esav might be imagining himself. And maybe Esav is saying to himself, oh boy, I can't wait to see how daddy is going to react. I can't wait to see the beating that he's going to get. I had to bear the brunt of his misdeeds, but at least let me enjoy the pleasure of watching Yaakov get raked over the coals by Yitzchak. That's what I would think. If Esav is present or watching from afar, I would imagine that those might be thoughts going through his head. And not only doesn't Yitzchak admonish Yaakov, but instead gives him blessing upon blessing upon blessing. You should marry. I should see you under the chuppah. Paraphrasing, you should have the blessing of your father, your grandfather. It's all here. It's beautiful. And Esav, instead of being furious, again, if you're Esav's lawyer and you want to defend him, you're going to say, you can't say that my client, Esav, is a hot-headed murderer, because he would have taken an arrow and shot it right through Yaakov's head there and then. He would have said, you know what, if my father's not going to take matters into his own hands, I'm going to take it, because he didn't just fool my father, he fooled me. He does none of this. Anyway, what is Esav's reaction to this? Yaakov hears his father. He goes to Padan Aram. My question to you is, why is Vayesse Yaakov? Why is he going to Padan Aram? I'd like to suggest that he's not going to run away from Esav as his mother had suggested, or that might be a secondary cause, but the first reason would be he's going to Padan Aram because his father sent him there to get married. And when Esav sees that the Benot Canaan are bad in the eyes of Yitzchak, his father, Vayelech Esav, he goes to Yishmael. He takes Mahalat Bat Yishmael, who is the son of Abraham, the sister of Nevayot, and he takes her as a wife. It seems that not only isn't Esav upset with his father, but he wants to do something to please his father. I'm sorry, who's there? Who's there? Oh, hi, I'm in a class. I'm giving a Zoom class. Can we come back? What is it? We're gonna do it another time. Thank you. I'm so sorry for all the interruptions. We were saying that Esav not only isn't upset that that Yaakov doesn't get punished, but he feels like he still wants to please his father. And with that, I'd like to go into the Vayetse Yaakov to start our parasha. So he leaves from Be'er Shava. I think a big overriding reason we stated is he's leaving Be'er Shava Yes, he might be leaving. His initial reason was because of the beracha, but he's going to Harana specifically. If the leaving is to leave the danger, the vayelech, the lech lecha that he's doing is clearly to find a wife, and that's his mission, and we need to know that going into our perashah. Now, what gets exciting here is that the beginning of our perashah and the end of our perashah is beautifully bookended. There's magnificent symmetry. On both ends, we start with angels, we end with angels. Even the grouping of words surrounding the beginning of our perashah, vayifga bamakom. If you turn to the end of your perashah, you'll see these words as well. Vayifgeu bo malache Elohim, and he calls Shem hamakom machanayim. We have something going on that makes this a beautiful literary unit. This perashah is going to be wrought with malachim, with angels. Now in the beginning, he's going to see them in his dream. At the end, he's going to see them at a place called Machanayim. And actually in the middle, he is going to encounter an angel in his dream that's going to tell him, it's time for you to go back home. So let's look at this week's perashah. Let's look at his dream. Vayifga bamakom. He is, what's this word, pega? Some of the commentaries might say that he prayed in the place because they want to tell us that if Abraham established Shacharit and Yitzchak established Tefilat Mincha, then here they want to say that this is the correlation to Parashat, to Tefilat Arbit, which is said at night, which we're going to see what it is that Yaakov is going to say at this point. But a couple of things that we should pay attention to is that nothing is in proper sequential order. What I mean by that is he comes to a place, he encounters this place, Pega, maybe he's struck by the place. I'm not sure exactly what happened in that spot, but the makom, they're not telling us, even though the previous verse spoke about Be'er Shava and Harana, we're not at a loss for describing mekomot, for giving names to places. Here, we're not going to tell you the name of the place. We're just going to tell you it's called a makom, a place, a space. It's beautiful to think that in Torah, makom, hamakom, like Baruch hamakom, could be another name for God, which is what he's going to encounter. And a makom, the kol makom, in any space that you make. So a makom could also be that intimate place within us that we make, that space that we make for God. So Yaakov is having an encounter on a physical level, on a spiritual level, on an emotional level. And a lot of his sequencing is going to be confounded. Vayalin Sham, he gets to a place and he sleeps there. Ki ba hashemesh, because the sun had set. If I was editing this, I would probably say that the sun set and then he decided to lie down, but he seems to lie down before the sun sets. And then it seems that he's already lying down and the sun already set. But at this point, he's taking from the stones of the place and putting them by his head. And then he's lying down in that place. So none of this makes sense in the form of sequential order. And that's because I don't think this is a story about Yaakov's sleeping arrangements, about the fact that he took stones and made a pillow for himself. I think because nothing is in its order, it's maybe placing us into the mindset of Yaakov, a person who is agitated, a person who is in distress, isn't always thinking straight, isn't always following a pattern and a methodical plan. And it could be it's it could be seen if we stop and think about where Yaakov is at this point. So I told you a lot. We got into the head of Esav. We psychoanalyzed him a little bit. We said we don't really think he's as bad as they claim he is, but we didn't really think about Yaakov. How's he feeling? What's he telling his therapist on his couch? Well, you see, I grew up, I was born, I was always in the second best. I was the Ben HaKatan. I'm always the one hanging on to somebody's heel to get anywhere. I'm an Ish Tam, I'm a Yoshev Ohalim, I'm a man who really just sits in the tent all day. I've been this introvert my whole life. The one time I decide to step out of my tent to do something, I make a mess of things, I take things, they spun out of control, and next thing I know, I'm posing in my brother's clothes and portraying and presenting myself as somebody that I'm not. And now I'm leaving, I have to leave. My brother, according to my mother, wants to kill me. And I'm going to find a wife. But the truth is, when my father went to get, needed a wife, there was a servant and all kinds of pomp and posture, gold and earrings and nose rings and things. And me, I'm leaving like a runaway with nothing, no food, no nothing. So maybe it's possible at this point, maybe Yaakov's feeling pretty down on himself. And it could even be seen, Vayesse merashotav, the stone. Where do we put stones by a person's head when they're lying down? Could be, was maybe preparing his own tombstone. Vayishkav b'makom, maybe he thought this was it. He's going to lie down and this is going to be the end of him. Ba hashemesh, the sun set on him. It's the end of his, he came to the end of his rope. And that's what makes this story at Torah so beautiful. Because just at the very point where it seems like Yaakov is going to give up and he's going to just Vayalen and Vayishkav in every way possible become and have a horizontal existence. I am lying down, I am flat, I'm putting a stone by my head. It was nice knowing you. Just at that point, Vayachalom, he has a dream. And in case you're wondering whether or not the dream is prophetic, I will tell you, the dream has this word, Vehine, repeated over and over. And we know that Vehine means that there's a divine intervention, that God is in this dream. So when we see Vayachalom Vehine, this is not just a dream about a person's daydreams, aspirations, as Freud might say. What we dream about during the day is what manifests in our dreams at night. This is not that. This is clearly prophecy. Vayachalom, he dreams, vehine, God's in that dream. And what do we see? A sulam mutzav arza. This is my happy place. I love these Pesukim. There's a sulam, a ladder. I often suggest that the ladder that is firmly planted on the ground with its head, magia hashamayma, with its head reaching towards the heavens, the anthropomorphic description of the ladder that has mutzav, that has the ability to be a netziv, to stand in command, to stand with its feet rooted with a strong foundation, and at the same time have a rosh. Our ladder also has a head, and it's magia, it's dynamic, it's reaching towards the heavens. Vehine, there's our word again. And also the angels of Elohim are going up and down within it. Olim v'yordim bo, even there's beautiful commentary that says bo, within him. But we have to stop for a minute and say this. If we see the ladder as a representation of Yaakov himself, then we might say that God is showing Yaakov an ideal version of himself. He's saying, Yaakov, when you hold the mirror up to yourself, you see a guy who's down and out with a headstone. When I see you, Yaakov, let me show you a better version of who you can become. And I believe that this dream speaks to that, because he's going to take the most vertical object. You're not horizontal, Yaakov. You're vertical, like a ladder. And the crazy part is, and I know crazy things happen in dreams, but angels going up and down a ladder is so oxymoronic. Why? Because if you think about angels, the first thing I tell you, if I say you're going to be an angel for Purim, you're going to go out and buy a set of wings. Yes, I see Jillian going like this. Thank you. And so how ridiculous is it that angels who have wings or certainly don't need a ladder to go up and down heaven? So maybe I'd like to suggest for today, if the ladder is a representation of Yaakov, then maybe those malachim, those messengers, those messages that are taking place within Yaakov, maybe olim veyordim, maybe they're messages being sent above Rosho, to his head. We did a lot of work on this, so I'm hoping, I know if we were live, you would finish my sentence. I see Joelle smiling because she does a lot of this kind of thinking. The messages are messages that are going from the heart to the brain, olim. They're going to go from a place of emotion to a place of logic. They're going, these messages, God is trying to say, don't just send messages from your brain down. Up until now, Yaakov, you've been an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. You've been all intellect. You've been all brain. You've been all logic. You've been all premeditated. You've been all thought. You thought about how you were going to get the blessing, but you didn't feel, you didn't go through the emotions of what would happen. How would that make Esav feel? How would they make my father feel? And how would that make you feel? You only went through the mechanics of the thought process, not the emotional component. And now this dream, God is showing him, Yaakov, you're going to be a sulam. I'm going to post you as a ladder. And in this ladder, what's happening first? Which way are the messages oriented? The messages are being oriented from below to above. It's time for your emotions to inform your intellect. It's time, says, and this is where it gets, to me, crazy beautiful. Now that Yaakov has left Be'er Shava, has left his family, and I'm going to say it even more clearly, has left his other half. He left Esav, they shared a womb. They're two halves to one whole. If you had to describe one as an upper brain and one as a lower brain, I might say that Mr. Yoshev or Halim would be the upper brain. He's in a stratosphere, in a realm. In the Ohel means communing with God, having an exchange or a connection with the divine, right? And how is Esav described? He is the Ish Sadeh. He's the man of the field. He's the Ish Yodei Asayid, Ish Sadeh. He's as external. What does it mean to be, just for a second, an Ish Yodei Asayid? An Ish Yodei Asayid means that you operate purely based on instinct. If you see a deer or a bird or whatever it is you're hunting, and you stop to think, the opportunity is gone. If you want to be a good hunter, you need instincts. You need to act without thinking. So if I had to give this instinctual part to somebody, I'd give it to Esav. And I'd say that he is all or mostly, and we see it from his actions. He doesn't think through his whole plan that he's gonna kill Yaakov and how exactly is that going to play out. He's acting based on his emotions. And even in his emotions, he doesn't act on them, but he's all about emotional. He's all about, what does he do when he finds out that his beracha was taken? His first thing is nothing calculated. It's just a burst, an expression that stems from an emotional place. And so now Yaakov is leaving his brother. And this is the hard part for us to swallow, but I'm going to say it. I think God is now telling Yitzchak, you had a partner. You had one person who was the emotional guy and one person who was the intellectual guy. And you lost the emotional guy. You lost the part, I'll call it the heart, not hard, the heart part, meaning, Yaakov, you now have to be both. You, in order for you to become whole again, look, if you have two brothers who are partners and one is the salesman who's out there, who's the making the sales and talking to the customers and selling the goods and traveling and doing all those things, which I would compare to Esav, he was the external part of the business. And then you have the other brother who might be the accountant, who might be the one who's inside, who's taking care of the inner workings, what's going to happen in the warehouse, whatever it is, the behind the scenes guy. The guy who's in the Ohel may have been Yaakov. And now you lost your salesman. Now you lost the guy who's out there in the field, who's out there doing what needs to be done externally. What has to happen if you want the business to stay afloat? Then the brother who's still there has to learn, has to get the skills necessary to compensate for the loss of that brother. And he may have to step outside the office, and he may have to get on a plane every now and then, and he may have to meet with some customers. And that's what's going to happen to Yaakov. He's going to have to travel, and he's going to have to meet new people. He's going to be as external as anybody we've ever seen become external. You know, in the Ohel, there was no freezing and there was no scorching. And Yaakov is not familiar with this type of, it's not something that's natural to him, but I think it's beautiful that the Torah comes and tells us we all have to reinvent ourselves at some part, at some point in our lives. Whatever it is, and whoever the people, our support that we have, we move on, we graduate. Sometimes it's a part of growing. Sometimes it could be a tragedy. Sometimes one parent has to be the mother and the father. And so here God is telling him, you know what? One sulam, one person could have olim veyordim. One person could play two roles. One person is able to fill those voids. And that's God put this circumstance. God's giving him this visual and giving it to us as well. So as we move forward, as these messages are going, I'm going to say from the heart to the brain, or the angels are going up and down, or Rashi will tell you the angels of the Holy Land are going back up and the new angels are coming back down. However you want to take it, the one thing that's very important is that we're never left unattended. We're never left without some kind of support here. There are angels, and that could be also the tension, the olim veyordim. I often use the visual of the heart rate monitor. Olim v'yordim, olim v'yordim, olim v'yordim. You're not dead, and those stones around your head are not your headstone. You're alive. I'm going to show you olim v'yordim, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I'm going to show you your heart rate, your heart monitor. You're alive, and these are all parts of messages. And maybe it's a how-to or a sensitivity that we could have when people are experiencing these emotions. These are ways that we can let them know if your heart is still beating, that you still have game, you still have an ability, and maybe if you were doing things from the top down, maybe now you have to do them from the bottom up, olim. Regardless, God comes to him. Vehine, again, Hashem nitzav alav. God himself is standing above him. And he introduces himself and he says, I am the father of Abraham, your father, and the father of Yitzchak. A lot of talk is done about the fact that they're calling Abraham his father as opposed to Yitzchak. And one of the reasons might be that Yaakov is going to resemble, his trajectory in life is going to resemble more Abraham than Yitzchak. He's going to have to be going out there. And that Kehal Amim, for instance, like Abraham is a Av Hamon Goyim, maybe what Yitzchak was telling him, Hayita Likhal Amim, I don't know if we'll get a chance to discuss this in the end, is Yaakov. He's telling him, now you have to be a Kehal Amim. Remember when your mother was pregnant and she went to talk to God, and God said, remember that whole conversation? That you were one of two, and the two of you could be le'omi ematz. Maybe you'd strengthen each other. Maybe one of you would be stronger than the other one. Regardless, what's important for you to know is that now you have to be a Kehal Amim. From you were once part of a Kehal. Now you are the starter for this new Kehal Amim. You yourself are going to have to garner the DNA, the tendencies that's going to be able to allow you to birth multiple people, multiple types. And that's actually what this whole parasha is about. I know we're only in the first Perek, but we're going to have the birthing of the tribes. He's going to marry two women, and maybe he has to marry two women, and those midrashim weren't so off, that Esav was intended to marry Leah. That's why her eyes were so weak, because she was busy crying. You know, that midrash that she didn't want to have to marry Yaakov, and Rachel was always destined for Yaakov. I don't know what I said, but Leah didn't want to marry Esav. Regardless, why does Yaakov have to marry both wives? Because he is now the totality. He is now, part of him has to make up, has to do double time for the brotherhood that he doesn't have. He has to be, I don't know if this makes sense, but he has to be his own brother. Because he was intended, he came into the world with a brother, and now he has to be that other half. He has to be his own brother, so he actually has to marry both of those wives. He has to fill the void that was left when he severed his relationship with his brother. Maybe that's a better way to state it. Regardless, I'm trying to get you to a specific place. God gives him a blessing, and he tells him, the land that you are sleeping on is going to be for you and your children, and they will be as multiple as the sand on the earth, uparatzta, and you will burst forth, yama, vakedma, tzafona, vanegba, in all the directions, vanibrechu, and all of the families of the Adama will be blessed by your offspring. And again, vehine, Anochi imach. You think you're alone? To me, this is probably, again, if you ever needed to give a person a pep talk who's down and out and horizontal and just pulled the covers over their face and said, I'm done, I'm over with, this pasuk is for you. Vehine anochi imach. Take these words and just make a bumper sticker, do what you have to do with them. God is saying, Vehine, I am always Anochi imach. The word Anochi, when a person uses it to talk about themselves, they're talking about their highest selves. They're talking about the part of their self that connects with the divine, that connects with their tselem Elokimness. And when he says Anochi imach, even if you're all alone, You're not by yourself. You're with your higher self. You're always with somebody. You're always with God. Ushmarticha, and being with God means that you will be protected wherever you go. And I will return you back to this place. I will not leave you until I've done what I promised to you. This is not just a promise for Yaakov. It's recorded here because it's a promise that God is making to all of us as children of Yaakov. Yaakov wakes up from his shena, which means shinui, from his change. He now has a changed perspective, or he's a changed man. And he says, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh. Indeed, Yud-Ke V'Av-Ke, the personal God of creation that allows us to recreate ourselves, is present in this place and in this space, which may be the physical space, but maybe the place within himself that he recognizes that God is within. He says, Anochi lo yadati. I didn't know my own self. I didn't know my own strength. I didn't know my own potential. I didn't know my own greatness. Vayira. And so now he is in a state of, don't tell me fear, he is in a state of awe. Vayira. He's in awe, and he says, Manora, how awesome this place is. This can't be anything other than Bet Elokim. And this here is the entry to the gateway to heaven. Now, he may have been either on Hara Moriah, Hara Bayit, whatever you want to call that mountain, that makom. Yes, the physical space was designated a holy place. But at the same time, what's equally as holy, and I'm going to dare say, or even holier than the physical makom, holier than the physical makom, is going to be the human space. That makom, that place, that is also a sha'at hashamayim. So if you need to access God, you can make a pilgrimage and you can go to the holy sites. But the holiest site of all is that place where you go from your emotions, when you start in the physical, when you engage with the world, when you engage with society, and then that informs your actions. That's what's going to inform your intellect. And that's why Yaakov needed to get out. How much you can't put your the ideas that you're learning, your theories, into practice unless you get out there and engage. And that's what Yaakov is doing. And he's saying, wow, I thought the only way to access God was in my Beit Midrash, in my tent. And now that I'm seeing that even from an external place and an external space, I'm able to access the greatest, highest Yud-Ke Vav-Ke divine. And he wakes up, he takes the Evan, he takes the stone that he had put by his head, the one that maybe he was considering his headstone, and instead, what does he do? He makes a matzeva. A matzeva, nitzav, mutzav, is a vertical standing, think of like the Washington Monument, like a tall, high standing structure, which represents who? It represents him. I am no longer horizontal, he says. I am now standing upright. And you know what he does that's beautiful? Vayitzok shemen al rosha, and he takes oil and he pours it on its head. But whose head is he pouring the oil on? His own. If the matzeva is a representation of him, he's anointing himself. He's chanukat habayiting himself. He is, what's that word? Inaugurating. He's inaugurating his own self. His own new self is undergoing an inauguration. It's probably the most beautiful thing that you could see. I want to call it as almost as close as a Techiyat Hamitim as we're going to see, because he goes from the most horizontal to the most vertical. And he calls the place Bet El, It used to be called luz, and he makes a neder, and he says, Hashem, if indeed you'll be with me on my way, and you give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, and I could return in peace to my home, to the house of my father, then Hashem, you'll be my God, and this stone that I made into a matzeva will be the house of God, meaning what? The stone, the matzeva, is a representation of Yaakov, but it's also a representation of the house of God. It's saying you could come to the house of God in any condition, but what's possible is that you can go from one extreme to the other if you're open to it, if you make that journey, if you orient yourself that way. And I feel so bad that the clock is ticking, but I do want to say this because I discovered it last night and I thought it was very exciting. Vayesse Yaakov raglav, he picks up his legs and he goes arza bene kedem. Where is he going? He's going to the place, to a previous former. Kedem, kadima means forward, but it means kedem, something from yesteryear, to an earlier place, to an earlier space. And what does that mean for us? I'd like to suggest that he's not just reborn and re-identifying himself and reinvigorated, but he's going to go to a place and a space that is going to show Yotzer Ha'adam, that's going to show his actual reformation. I'll explain that in a minute, but just to prove it, one of the things that he does is he goes, they tell us this whole story that we don't really have to know because the Torah doesn't waste words about. He goes to a well and there's a big even on the well, and all of the shepherds are gathered. Do we really need to know all this? And they can't seem to get the stone off the be'er because it's a very heavy stone. And Yaakov asks them and says, who are you? Me'ayin, where are you from? And they say, we're from Haran. And he asks them, do you happen to know Lavan, the son of Nahor? And they say, yes, we know him. And then he says, does he have shalom? And they say, yes, he is in peace. And then Rachel, his daughter, comes with the son. Vayomed hen od hayom gadol. I don't know about you, but there's a term called Badinsky. Yaakov, you're in a strange town. You know nothing, you know nobody. It's your first time there. You're making introductions and the people are being nice to you. Not for anything, but what business is it of yours to meddle in the affairs of other people's watering patterns for their flocks? Mind your own beeswax. But no, he tells them, hey, isn't it time already where the sun is pretty high? Isn't it time to be feeding? Shouldn't you be feeding your sheep? And they say, no, we can't do it until we gather all of the shepherds together, and only then will we be able to remove the stone. If this is not a metaphor, then I don't know what is. When a person is born, the waters, we're going to break their waters. The waters are going to come through. And I would like to suggest that there's a metaphor here that's saying that certain things are required for Yaakov to be birthed again, for him to burst forth from the waters, so to speak, of the womb. And one of those things that has to happen is this he'asef. There has to be a gathering. You have to either gather your thoughts, you have to gather yourself, you have to become whole again, you have to be a kehalamim, you have to be a cohesive unit in order for you to become the person that you're intended to be. And what does he do to become that person? Oh yeah, I forgot. I have to channel my inner Esav. And so what does he do? The yeshiva boy who's pale, white, and doesn't have a single muscle on his body because he's been yeshiving in the ohel all this time, what does he do? He hasn't been lifting weights all this time, I could tell you that much. What does he do? He single-handedly is able, vayigal et ha'even. In verse 10, he's able to remove the rock from the opening of the be'ed, and he is able to give all of the water to hydrate, to give them to drink, all the son of Rachel's flock. And then he does one other thing. Vayissa et kolo vayevk. He's becoming, he's cultivating, I'm trying to think of a better word. He is nurturing a side of himself that has been dormant. He had the luxury of it being dormant because he had Esav to do that. But now in accessing, he decides that he has to be the strong one. And he digs into his mind and how, I mean, there are millions, feel free to read the commentaries of how is it possible that he was able, like they needed all the shepherds to take this rock off and he's able to do it single-handedly because the mind is where the power begins. And he was always had a strong mind, but now he had to send messages to the rest of his body to actualize everything that he had been cultivating in his mind all along. That's one side. But then Vayissa et kolo vayevk is one of the most beautiful pieces because it says that he is able to just do something impulsive. He raises his voice and first of all, he kisses Rachel. I'm sorry, but this is a G-rated sefer. We don't start kissing people that we first met for the first time at a well, but his impulsive side is being awakened. He's crying, he's kissing, he's doing all of the things that he needs to do to activate himself to be this full person. And I'll leave you with this last thought. The two things that he tells to Lavan when he meets him in order to be able to marry his daughters, he says the word avadetani evdecha vayavod. There's this word avodah, avodah, avodah. He's going to work, work, work. And the other word that's used in describing what he does for Lavan is that he was going to eshmor, et soncha eshmor. And I'd like to suggest that the two things that Yaakov is doing in this week's Parashah, Avda and Shamra. He's doing Avodah and Shemirah. And where do we see these two verbs being used together? First place we see them is by Adam. God places Adam in the garden. Le'avda u'le'shamra. What Yaakov is doing in the house of Lavan is he is not just recreating himself. He is going to be a blueprint for humanity like Adam was a blueprint for humanity. And in order to be a blueprint for humanity, he has to have these two things, avodah and shemirah. Avodah, which might be considered something active. The rabbis say avodah is connected with all the mitzvot aseh, and shemirah, lishmor, shamoret hashabbat, is be careful of the lo ta'aseh, of things that we shouldn't do. And so for our discussion today, this Avda and Shamra is Yaakov's way of cultivating his two sides. Because if Esav was the active one and he was the one who was out there and working, and who does he Avda for? The whole time he was doing his Avodah, he was intending it for Rachel, but he really did it and ended up with Leah. So everything having to do with the Esav and the wife that wasn't possibly intended for Esav is all part of the Avodah and the Shemirah. And why is it so beautiful? Because even when Rachel's son Yosef has a dream, it says Yaakov shamar et hadavar. He's passive about it. He doesn't do anything about it. He's waiting in expectancy to see what's going to happen about it. But also on some level, he believes that Shamar is attached to the Rachel part of himself, to that other self that he needs to cultivate. And I'm sorry that I went over time. I just want to throw in one or two little pieces so we could address the Jew living in exile. We start to see some of the ideas presenting themselves, how Yaakov makes a deal with Lavan, for instance, that he is going to shepherd all the monotone sheep. And in the case that any of the monotone sheep happen to give birth to spotted or speckled, he gets to keep those. And Lavan thinks that that is a great arrangement because there's no way that the monotone sheep are going to yield spotted and speckled sheep. But like we see today, the Jews in exile, even in Eretz Israel, we are masters of science. We understand genetics, we understand dominant genes. He was able in his earliest days, before we knew anything about cloning or any of the things that we know today, he was able to come up with a way to have monotone sheep give birth to spotted and speckled sheep, because in order for the Jew to survive in exile, we have to be smart. We have to understand the sciences. We have to understand an economy. And that's what we ended up doing. And throughout our history, the greatest economists were Jewish. The greatest scientists were Jewish. Part of our being able to not just survive, but thrive in Galut is going to be taking lessons from Yaakov, from doing the best with what we have, from engaging with the culture, but not internalizing and adapting that culture to be ours. And sorry that I went over time, but I just want to end by saying our story ends with a very strange occurrence, which is the treaty that's made between Lavan and Yaakov. You might be familiar with the term Yegar Sheheduta. And I'd like to suggest that what Lavan wanted was to enter into a brit, to engage, to be connected to Yaakov. But Yaakov instead, what does he do? He erects a matzeva. He makes two structures. One is a tall structure that we know represents him. And this Yegar Sheheduta, we have to be very sharp to understand what it means. Yegar Sheheduta, which is, they call it maybe Gal Ed, is a heap of rocks. A matzeva is one united stone. That's Yaakov. He's finally going to be a united, integrated person. But the structure that he makes for Lavan, and it says Echav, maybe they're the children or the people that were with Lavan. Some rabbis say it was his own sons, so it could have been a message for them. But what is that Gal Ed? What is that heap of rocks? That heap of rocks is what's going to stand between us and the Lavans of the world and the other cultures of the world. Meaning, we could all be together, but we're each our own stone. I am not fusing with you. I am not losing my identity to be part of you. If what you wanted is for us to engage, we can engage, but we're going to engage in a way that says, I am going to be intact who I am, together with you intact who you are. In that scenario, if we can be together, if we can form a bunch of rocks together like that, then that's a relationship that I'm willing to have. But I am not willing to take myself and fuse myself and join your gods, join your idolatry, join your culture, join your value system. That I can't do. And that's why he builds two structures. One that says, I am now at the end of our perashah, a matzeva. I still am going to reflect what I had seen in the earliest of my dreams that I have a vertical existence, me, God, and I connect heaven and earth with my relationship to myself and my God. And when it comes to relating to other cultures, I'm happy to be with them, but I can't be fused and connected and attached to them to the point that I lose my own identity. And so that also, I believe, is a blueprint for the Jew in Galut. We have to know at what point we could connect and at what point we must be a matzeva, we must anoint ourselves and retain this notion, this knowledge, this belief that God showed us in the ladder, that we pour oil on our heads and we anoint ourselves and we, what's that word I was looking for, that Chanukah Habayit word, we inaugurate ourselves every day. We have to re-inaugurate ourselves. Inaugurating ourselves means redefining sometimes who we are, accepting sometimes parts of us and supports that we've had in the past, and still becoming a kehalamim and filling the voids that we may sometimes encounter in our lives and filling them to become whole and to recognize that Hashem is always with us and always guarding us and always protecting us. And the berachot that he gave to Yaakov are still alive and well and still pertain to us today. I thank you for staying and